Why was everyone staring at her like she didn't belong? The room hummed with cold precision, glowing consoles, blue holographic grids, the steady pulse of simulated reactor cores. Inside Simulation Chamber 7, the air itself seemed to breathe authority. Every cadet stood tall, shoulders squared, their uniforms pressed to perfection, their futures gleaming like the polished floors beneath their boots. And then there was her. A woman older than most, her hair streaked with gray, pulled back in a tight, severe bun. She wore a simple charcoal maintenance jumpsuit, no insignia, no medals, nothing to suggest she belonged among the elite. A datapad rested loosely in her hands, her eyes scanning the glowing numbers on a side monitor, expression calm, distant, indifferent. To Cadet Commander Jorik, that indifference was an insult. He stood at the center of the simulator bridge, broad-shouldered, confident, the Academy's golden boy. The kind of man who'd been told since birth that leadership ran in his blood. His boots gleamed. His tone dripped with mock courtesy. Someone get her out of here before she trips on a power conduit and sues the fleet. Laughter rippled through his squad, shallow, sycophantic, the kind that doesn't come from amusement, only fear of silence. But she didn't react, didn't look up, didn't even blink. She simply observed the glowing readout in front of her, nodding energy fluctuations like she was solving a quiet puzzle. The laughter died quickly. Her calm wasn't passive, it was unnerving. Up in the dark observation gallery, General Thern Vance leaned forward in his chair. A mountain of a man, silver-haired and battle-scarred, he had commanded more ships than these cadets had years of life. His eyes narrowed. He saw something none of them did. The stance, that balance, perfectly weighted feet, shoulders steady but ready, a stillness that wasn't ignorance, it was awareness. The kind of quiet honed over decades on the decks of warships. He'd seen that stance once before, long ago, on the deck of a dreadnought after a classified battle that still haunted his sleep. His chest tightened with memory and a creeping sense of awe. He knew who she was. And he knew exactly what was about to happen. Down below, the tension simmered. The cadets, Jorik's chosen team, the elite of the elite, circled their stations. His communications officer, Rorik, recited pre-flight codes like a parrot. His tactical officer checked weapons simulations with mechanical precision. It was rehearsed, a performance meant to impress the unseen instructors watching behind tinted glass. And yet the woman's presence unsettled the rhythm, a grain of sand in their perfect machinery. She stood silently, still reading, still ignoring them. Jorik's smirk sharpened. "Seriously," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "does anyone know what she's even doing here? This is a restricted combat simulation, not a waste management seminar." He turned to her, his voice syrupy and cruel. "Ma'am, I'm sure the sanitation department needs you. The bridge is for warriors." Several junior technicians flinched. They knew she'd arrived with General Vance, but no one dared intervene. The golden boy was untouchable. Then, for the first time, she looked up. Her eyes were pale blue, not cold, not angry, just piercingly observant. She met Jorik's gaze for less than a second, just enough to measure him, not as a man, as data. Then she gave the smallest nod as if confirming a diagnosis and went back to her screen. Jorik laughed too loud. "Unbelievable. The brass sends us a mute janitor as a good luck charm. All right, squad, let's show the cleaning staff how real officers operate." Begin simulation, Maelstrom run. The world around them came alive. Outside the viewport, a violent storm of plasma clouds, lightning arcs and gravitational distortions. The Maelstrom run. The final trial every command cadet had to face before graduation. A test so brutal, so unpredictable it had become myth. Nobody ever won it. But Jorik didn't believe in legends. He believed in himself. He had spent months studying this simulation, analyzing every variable, convinced he'd found the flaw, the hidden path through the storm that others had missed. He was going to do the impossible, and he would do it with an audience. For the first 10 minutes, everything went according to plan. Commands snapped like gunfire. Tactical, fire on bearing 260. Adjust reactor output, maintain 40% shields. The team moved in perfect sync. Torpedoes found their marks. Enemy echoes vanished in blue flame. And Jorik, he smiled. He glanced at the woman in gray as if to say, see, this is how it's done. But the Maelstrom run wasn't designed to be beaten. The first sign of trouble was subtle, a flicker on the engineering console. A moment later, a soft alarm tone echoed through the chamber, the kind of sound you barely notice until it multiplies. Report, Jorik barked. Reactor fluctuations, came the stammered reply. I'm losing containment. Then a simulated plasma burst. A console exploded in red light. Engineering officer incapacitated. One by one, the bridge systems began to die. Lights dimmed. Sensors ghosted. The air grew thick with simulated smoke and the real scent of panic. Jorik's voice cracked. Compensate, redirect auxiliary power. I can't, navigation's offline. Enemy ships multiplying, I can't lock targets. I've lost helm control. The unbreakable commander froze. His strategy, his perfect plan, crumbled like glass. The Maelstrom was rewriting itself, adapting, turning his confidence into chaos. Through the shouting, through the alarms and failing lights, the woman in the gray jumpsuit moved. She didn't run, didn't shout. She simply walked. Her boots made no sound over the panicked noise. She passed the cadets, who parted instinctively, as if some ancient part of them recognized command when they saw it. She stopped at the communications console. The cadet slumped there. Rorik looked up in confusion as she gently moved him aside. No words, no hesitation. Her hands hovered over the dead system. Then they began to move. Not the frantic typing of panic, but rhythm, purpose, precision. Like a pianist playing an invisible melody, the dark console flickered. Then lines of raw code appeared, green text cascading across the black. She wasn't restarting the system. She was talking to it, directly. Within seconds, the alarms began to fade. Power rerouted from non-essential systems. The reactor stabilized. Tactical ghosts blinked out. The view screen cleared. Silence. The only sound was her last keystroke, a soft click, followed by one line of text glowing green on the main screen. Comms link established. Fleet command uplink secure. The impossible had been done, not through fire or shouting or ego, but through calm, through competence. Every cadet stared, eyes wide, jaws slack. Jorik's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, but no words came. It wasn't just that she'd fixed the system. It was how, effortless, elegant, absolute. Above, in the observation gallery, General Vance stood slowly, his eyes never leaving her. Full stop, he ordered. The storm outside vanished. The lights steadied. A single spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the woman at the console. She didn't flinch, didn't bask in the attention. She was already running final diagnostics, ensuring every system she'd touched was stable. Then footsteps, heavy, deliberate, echoing down the metal staircase. General Vance appeared on the bridge. The cadets snapped to attention like statues. No one breathed. He walked straight past Jorik, didn't even glance at him. He stopped beside the woman in gray. For a long moment he said nothing. The silence itself became judgment. Then his voice, calm, cold, commanding. Cadets. The word hit like a whip. For 50 years, the Maelstrom run has been the ultimate test of this academy. It is designed to be unwinnable. It's meant to show you what breaks first, your systems or your character. Today, you broke. His gaze swept the bridge, finally landing on Jorik. You, cadet commander, failed more completely than anyone before you. Not because you lost control of the simulation, but because you lost control of yourself long before it began. He stepped aside, extending an arm toward the woman still seated at the console. You looked at this officer, His voice grew quiet, dangerous. And you saw a janitor. You saw a civilian, someone beneath you. A beat of silence. You were blind. Vance's voice hardened. This is not a technician. This is not an administrator. He turned, saluted sharply, the kind of salute given only to legends. Cadets, this is Fleet Admiral Eva Rostova. The room froze. Gasps filled the silence. Jorik's blood went cold. That name, he'd heard it whispered in lectures, referenced in classified fragments, the ghost of Orion Spur, the architect of Cygni's X, the woman who commanded entire fleets with code and silence. And she was standing right in front of him. Vance continued, his tone reverent now. She wrote the Maelstrom run simulation 20 years ago. She designed the command software on every capital ship in the fleet. The reason none of you have seen her before is because her identity is a military secret. Jorik's chest tightened. His arrogance, his words janitor, sanitation department, replayed in his mind like blades twisting in slow motion. The Admiral stood. She turned to face them. No medals, no triumph in her expression, just calm. The core is sound, she said quietly to the general. The human element, however, still requires calibration. Then she looked at Jorik. Just one glance, that same quiet nod. No anger, no satisfaction, just truth. And in that silence, something inside him cracked, not his pride, but the hollow illusion beneath it. The simulation chamber held its breath. No one dared move. Even the hum of the consoles felt subdued. Vance saluted again, crisp, perfect, full of meaning. Admiral Rostova, he said softly, on behalf of the Academy, my deepest apologies. She returned the nod, wordless, collected her datapad and walked away. Her footsteps faded into the dark corridor. Only when the door closed did the cadets exhale. And somewhere deep in Jorik's chest, humiliation twisted into something unexpected, awareness. Because in that moment, he understood the lesson the Maelstrom had always been trying to teach. Strength doesn't announce itself. Competence doesn't shout. And real power doesn't need to be seen to be felt. What happens after silence breaks? After humiliation echoes longer than applause. The story of what happened on Simulation Deck 7 didn't explode across the Academy, it rippled, quietly, relentlessly, like a pulse beneath the walls. Cadets didn't gossip out loud, they whispered, in corridors between classes, in the echo of the gym's steel floors, in low-voiced murmurs across encrypted chat channels. Did you hear? The woman in gray, she was an admiral. No, not just an admiral. The Fleet Admiral. By morning, the incident had already become legend. A cautionary tale, a ghost story with a moral nobody wanted to admit hit too close. They called it the ghost on the bridge. Some said she rewired the simulation with her mind. Others swore the lights flickered in time with her heartbeat. The truth was quieter and far more dangerous. She hadn't used magic. She'd used mastery. And the people who saw it would never see competence the same way again. But for Cadet Commander Jorik, the Academy's golden boy turned fool, the aftermath wasn't whispered. It was lived. He could feel the weight of eyes on him in every corridor. Once, his name commanded attention. Now, it summoned pity. The same cadets who used to laugh at his jokes avoided his gaze. The same squad that had worshipped his arrogance now moved on, seeking new suns to orbit. No one expelled him. No official record condemned him. General Vance didn't even reprimand him publicly. He didn't have to. The damage was already done. Jorik had been broken, and everyone knew it. He stopped sitting at the front of the lecture halls, stopped volunteering answers, stopped leading. His voice, once booming with misplaced confidence, turned quiet. The arrogance had drained out of him, leaving behind something raw and unfamiliar: shame. At night, when the corridors emptied and the Academy's artificial lights dimmed to their maintenance cycle, he found himself walking the simulation decks. past rows of humming machines, past silent, dark bridges where cadets once shouted commands into fake chaos. Sometimes he stopped before Deck 7. The door plaque had changed. Someone had stenciled a new name beneath the official numbering in white paint. Rostova's Bridge. He stood there often, staring at that name, the memory of her calm, the way her hands moved across that console, the silence that swallowed every insult looping in his head like a haunting. What bothered him wasn't that she'd beaten him, it was how easily she'd done it. No anger, no performance, just competence. She hadn't even needed to look at him. Every moment since that day was a mirror he couldn't escape. In every mistake he noticed among his peers, he saw his old reflection. In every silence he heard the weight of hers. General Vance, of course, had seen this coming. The old soldier didn't need to say much. He let the shame do its work. Sometimes lessons didn't need correction, just quiet. And so Vance said nothing. He simply had Jorik removed from Iga's squad command. No ceremony, no announcement, just a change of assignment. When Jorik walked into the mess hall the next morning, his old chair, the one at the head of the table, was occupied by someone else. The message was clear. He didn't fight it, didn't protest. He simply took his tray and sat by himself at the far end. The others pretended not to notice. Weeks passed. He became invisible. But invisibility, he would come to learn, is where humility begins. One evening after drills, he found himself wandering toward the lower hangar bays. It was late. The air smelled of metal and coolant, the rhythmic hiss of plasma conduits echoing through the cavernous space. And there she was, Admiral Rostova. Not in a uniform of gold and medals, but in that same gray jumpsuit, sleeves rolled, grease smudged on her cheek. She was kneeling beside a maintenance hatch, tool in hand, surrounded by a small group of junior engineers. She wasn't ordering them, she was teaching. Jorik froze in the doorway, his pulse pounding. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to stay invisible. But something stronger, guilt, respect, maybe both, pulled him forward. He approached slowly, stopping a few meters away. The engineers stiffened, expecting another display of arrogance, but Jorik's voice was quiet. "Ma'am." Rostova looked up. No emotion, just that same assessing calm, the kind that weighed the worth of things, not their appearances. "I have no excuse," he said. His voice trembled slightly. "My arrogance was a failure of character. I was wrong, and thank you for the lesson." The hangar fell silent. The engineers exchanged uncertain glances. Rostova simply studied him. For a long moment she said nothing. Her gaze didn't soften, but it wasn't cruel either. It was surgical. Finally she nodded once, the same subtle gesture from that day on the bridge, and turned back to the diagnostic screen. "The energy fluctuations in that manifold are inconsistent," she said, her tone even instructional. "Textbook solution says replace the unit. An observant officer, however, would notice the microfractures in the casing. It's just a pressure seal. One fix costs the fleet 1,000,000 credits. The other costs 10. She turned to him, eyes sharp as glass. "Assumptions get you killed out there, cadet, or they just make you wasteful. Hand me that hydrospanner." He obeyed, no hesitation, no pride. And in that moment, something shifted. Because this wasn't punishment. It was an invitation. Over the next days, Jorik began showing up at the hangar more often. He didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't command. He listened, he watched, he learned. Rostova never coddled him, never praised. She gave him tasks that tested his patience and attention, not his ego. System diagnostics, sensor recalibrations, power grid alignments. The kind of quiet work that demanded humility to even begin. And slowly, Jorik discovered something he hadn't expected: peace. There was a strange, satisfying rhythm in the work. The hum of machinery, the glow of plasma conduits, the subtle balance between precision and instinct. He began to see the ship differently, not as a weapon to be wielded, but as a living network of systems that breathed and reacted. One evening, while they worked in silence, Rostova spoke. Her voice carried that same measured calm. Command is not about noise, cadet. It's about signal, knowing when to speak and when to let silence do the work. He didn't answer, he just nodded. And for the first time, she allowed the faintest trace of a smile. Word of his transformation spread, though he didn't know it. The academy noticed. Instructors whispered that something in him had changed, the swagger replaced with steadiness, the vanity replaced with patience. His former squadmates, uncertain how to face the new Jorik, simply watched from a distance. Some mocked him quietly. Others envied him, because while they chased perfection, he had found purpose. Rostova, true to her nature, remained a ghost. She never lectured. She simply existed, a living lesson wrapped in silence. Wherever she went, systems ran smoother, tempers cooled, ego deflated. Her influence was invisible but absolute. It wasn't long before Deck 7 became something else entirely, a sacred space. Cadets no longer treated it as a mere simulator. They entered it like a chapel. The instructors didn't even need to speak its name aloud. The plaque said it all, Rostova's Bridge. Inside, the console she had once sat at remained untouched, clean, revered. No one dared change its configuration. A single line of code still glowed on its startup screen. Comms link established. It had become a motto whispered among cadets when facing an impossible problem. Just establish the link. It meant stay calm, find connection, fix what's broken without noise. General Vance, ever the strategist, understood the power of myth. He archived the simulation's recording, keeping it as required viewing for every new cadet intake, not for entertainment but as warning. He would stand before the recruits, his voice gravel and gravity, and say, "Look at their faces. Look at the arrogance before the fall. Then look at her, silent, steady. She doesn't react to chaos. She resolves it." He would pause, eyes hard. That's what leadership looks like. For Jorik, the lesson became personal scripture. Every action now began with one thought: don't assume. Observe. Every problem, no matter how small, became a mirror, another chance to test what he'd learned. Weeks turned to months. The weight of humiliation faded, replaced by something sturdier, dignity. The academy's culture began to shift with him. Slowly, subtly, cadets started to respect the engineers, the maintenance teams, the unseen hands that made their victories possible. The phrase "pulling a Jorik" entered their slang meaning to make a foolish assumption based on appearances. Its counterpart, having a Rostova moment, meant solving a problem through quiet, unseen competence. And beneath it all, the woman herself moved like a phantom, teaching, calibrating, disappearing. She didn't stay anywhere long. She wasn't there for glory. She was there to fix things, not just systems, but people. One night, long after the hangar lights dimmed, Jorik found himself alone again. Only this time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. He remembered her words. Command is about signal, not noise. He smiled to himself, not with pride but peace. Because for the first time in his life, he understood. Sometimes the loudest lesson isn't shouted at all. It's whispered in silence, in humility, in the steady rhythm of hands that simply know what to do. And somewhere deep within the academy's halls, the legend of the ghost on the bridge grew stronger, not as a warning anymore, but as a guide. Because dignity, when it's real, doesn't demand recognition. It simply acts. What happens when silence starts to teach louder than command? Months passed and the academy began to change, not through reform or orders but through osmosis. It started small. A cadet double-checked a technician's report before dismissing it. A young engineer refused to rush a calibration because Admiral Rostova wouldn't approve sloppy work. And in the cafeteria, when someone mocked a maintenance worker, the laughter that used to follow never came. It just died. People were remembering. Her name wasn't printed on any roster, but her presence lingered in every corridor. The legend had become atmosphere. Cadet Jorik moved through that world like a man who had been rebuilt from the inside out. The arrogance that once filled every room he entered had burned away, leaving behind something steadier. He was still young, still proud in ways he didn't understand, but he was learning the hardest truth any soldier can face: that leadership begins where ego ends. Rostova didn't make it easy for him. She didn't make anything easy. She gave him problems without instruction, damaged circuits, misaligned power relays, half-broken systems that required patience more than knowledge. Every failure became a mirror. One morning she handed him a diagnostics pad, its screen alive with scrolling error codes. "Find the fault," she said. He frowned. No location data, no trace markers. Her answer was simple: figure it out. He worked for 6 hours. His mind went through every technical manual, every procedure he could recall. Nothing fit. Finally, exhausted, he stopped trying to solve it and started to listen. The hangar was quiet except for the hum of the reactors beneath the floor. He closed his eyes. The rhythm of the system became audible, a faint pulse of imbalance. One misaligned conduit vibrating out of phase with the others. He followed the sound, tracing it to a panel near the aft bulkhead. When he opened it, the problem revealed itself: a hairline crack in a power coupling, so small no scan would have found it. He replaced it, powered up the system, and the errors vanished. He turned back to Rostova, breathless. "It's fixed." She didn't praise him. She didn't even look impressed. She just nodded once and said, "You stopped talking long enough to hear it." That night Jorik wrote her words down. "Stop talking long enough to hear it." It became his mantra. Every day she taught him without teaching. One moment, she would correct the angle of his stance as he lifted a conduit brace. "Your balance is off." A commander's posture tells his crew if he's calm. Another day, she would make him watch a junior engineer reassemble a circuit from memory, not because he needed the skill, but because she wanted him to see what respect looked like in motion. Sometimes she disappeared for days, no explanation. When she returned, her jumpsuit bore new streaks of oil, new scuffs on her boots, as if she had been crawling through the ship's heart itself. Jorik never asked where she went. He just listened when she spoke. "Every system has a rhythm," she told him once, adjusting a pressure valve with delicate precision. "So does every crew. Break the rhythm and it collapses. Respect it and it will hold together even under fire." Jorik absorbed every word like oxygen. But the academy was still full of those who hadn't learned. Arrogance dies slowly. One afternoon, during a fleet tactics lecture, a fellow cadet, Lyra, raised a hand. "Sir," she asked the instructor, "why do we spend so much time studying failure? Shouldn't leadership be about success?" The instructor smiled thinly. "You can't learn command from victory, cadet. Victory hides all flaws. Failure shows you everything." Jorik felt those words hit harder than intended. He had lived them. He was living them. After class, Lyra approached him. She was one of the few who still spoke to him openly, confident, curious, but respectful. "You were there, weren't you?" she said quietly. "The Maelstrom run." He hesitated. "Yes." "Was it true about the woman?" He met her eyes. It was true. "What was she like?" He thought for a moment before answering. "She was like gravity. She didn't demand attention. She just shaped everything around her." The next day, Lyra joined him in the hangar, then another cadet, then 2 more. None of them were assigned there, they came voluntarily. Rostova didn't object. She simply added new tools to the workbench and kept teaching in her quiet, unspoken way. It wasn't long before the hangar turned into something like an unofficial classroom, not of orders and ranks, but of reflection. Cadets who came in loud left thoughtful. Those who came in prideful left humbled. Rostova didn't lead them, she anchored them. One evening, as the group disassembled a faulty navigation array, She paused, eyes distant, and said softly, "When I was a lieutenant, I thought leadership was about control, about knowing every answer. Then a battle taught me otherwise." The cadets froze. She rarely spoke of her past. She continued, voice low. "We lost power mid-combat. My captain panicked. He started shouting orders, demanding impossible fixes. The crew froze. I realized then that fear spreads faster than fire. So I did the only thing I could. I stayed quiet. I focused. And one by one, they followed my silence back to stability." Her gaze swept across them. "A calm mind saves more lives than a loud voice ever will." Jorik watched her closely. He had wondered for months what haunted her, what battle had left that subtle sadness in her eyes. Now he understood. She wasn't teaching to build officers. She was teaching to prevent ghosts. The academy started to notice. Instructors reported a measurable change in group cohesion. Simulations that once ended in chaos now ended in cooperation. Cadets began to approach challenges differently, slower, more deliberate, less consumed by competition. Even General Vance saw it. He reviewed the performance logs late one night, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "She's fixing them," he thought, "from the inside out." He visited the hangar the next morning. The cadets snapped to attention, startled. Rostova didn't. "Still wearing that jumpsuit, Admiral?" he asked, half amused. "It gets the job done," she replied. He nodded toward Jorik, who was bent over a conduit schematic, grease on his face. "That one's different." "He's listening," Rostova said simply. Vance studied her. "You're not just training him, you're training the next generation." Her eyes softened slightly. "No, General, I'm just reminding them who they are before the noise convinces them otherwise." He chuckled, deep and gravelly. "And how long do you plan to haunt my academy?" She didn't answer. She just smiled faintly, the kind of smile that meant as long as I'm needed. That was the last day anyone saw her in uniform. By the next week, her quarters were empty. Her access logs went dark. No one knew where she'd gone, not even Vance. It was as if she'd stepped back into the void from which she came. But her presence remained everywhere. The hangar she'd used became known unofficially as Rostova's workshop. Her tools were left untouched, her datapads preserved, her words quoted like doctrine. Cadets began to record her lessons, passing them down to new intakes. And Jorik, now older, calmer, became their quiet mentor. He never called himself a leader, he simply helped, guided, listened. One night, as he walked through the corridors lit only by the dim emergency strips, he passed a pair of first-year cadets arguing over a systems diagram. Their voices were tense. One accused the other of incompetence. He stopped beside them, studied their schematic, and said gently, "Before you argue, ask yourself if you're trying to be right, or if you're trying to solve the problem." They fell silent. He handed the pad back and walked away. It was the kind of advice Rostova would have given. The next morning, a rumor began that Jorik himself had been personally trained by the Ghost Admiral. For once, he didn't deny it. Not because he wanted the credit, but because he understood that myths sometimes carry truth better than reports ever could. General Vance saw him later that week. They stood together on the balcony overlooking the simulator chambers. "You've changed," Vance said. Jorik nodded. "She changed me." "No," the old general said, shaking his head. "She just showed you the cracks. You did the rebuilding yourself." For a long moment, they stood in silence, watching cadets moving below like currents in a vast machine. "Do you think she'll ever come back?" Jorik asked quietly. Vance's eyes twinkled. "She never left, not really." He gestured toward the cadets below, the steady posture, the deliberate teamwork, the quiet confidence that had replaced the old swagger of generations past. "She's in all of them now." And she was. Her voice echoed in every calm command, every moment of composure under pressure. Her philosophy had embedded itself in the Academy's operating system, not written in code, but in conduct. A month later, during a new class orientation, the training officers played the recording of the infamous Maelstrom run. Jorik stood at the back, arms folded, watching as the screen filled with chaos, alarms, shouting failure. He remembered the heat of shame on his face, the laughter that had once followed his arrogance. He remembered the spotlight, the silence, the truth. As the video reached the moment where Rostova walked toward the console, the room went utterly still. The new cadets watched, mesmerized, as she moved with that quiet, predatory grace. When the screen froze on her final keystroke, a link established, the instructor turned to the class. "Tell me," he asked, "what did she do that none of them could?" Dozens of voices murmured different answers. She fixed it. She stayed calm. She knew the system. Jorik spoke softly from the back. She listened. Heads turned. The instructor smiled knowingly. Exactly. The lights came up. The cadets sat in thoughtful silence. That night, a few of them lingered by the simulator door, tracing their fingers over the plaque that still bore her name. One of them whispered, almost to herself, "I want to be like her." Jorik, passing by, overheard and smiled faintly. "Then start by being quiet." In the dim glow of the hallway lights, he realized something profound. Legacy wasn't about statues or medals. It was about rhythm, a pattern of thought and behavior that outlives the teacher. Rostova hadn't left instructions. She'd left imprints. And as Jorik walked away, the hum of the academy around him sounded different, less mechanical, more alive. Every corridor, every bridge, every simulation carried her fingerprint. The ghost admiral had vanished into silence once more, but her silence had become the academy's heartbeat. And for Jorik, the boy who once mocked her, that heartbeat was now his compass. How does a lesson become culture? Not through command, not through rule books, through repetition, quiet, consistent human repetition. By the time another cycle of cadets entered the Aegis Command College, the legend of the Ghost Admiral had become more than a story. It was woven into their vocabulary, their humor, their ethics. They didn't learn about her in official lectures. They felt her in the way instructors paused before dismissing a question, in the way the maintenance crews were greeted now with nods instead of silence, in the small acts of respect that stitched the academy back together. There were still the loud ones, there always are, but even they seemed quieter now. Pride hadn't vanished. It had evolved. Jorik was proof of that. The once celebrated cadet commander, the one who mocked, who strutted, who led with ego, now moved through the halls like a man who had nothing left to prove. He wasn't broken anymore. He was recalibrated. He spent most of his time in the hangar, Rostova's old domain, helping junior cadets troubleshoot simulation engines and power couplings. It wasn't glamorous work. No parades. No applause. But he found meaning there in the quiet hum of systems that responded only to patience and precision. One afternoon, while repairing a magnetic stabilizer with a group of first-years, a young cadet asked him, "Sir, why do you spend so much time down here? You could be back in command studies. You're top tier." Jorik smiled faintly. "Command begins here," he said, tapping the deck beneath them. "You can't steer a ship if you don't respect what keeps it alive." The cadet nodded, unsure what he meant, but the words stayed. That's how culture changes, not by decree but by echo. General Thern Vance, watching the transformation from above, understood the rarity of what he was witnessing. In 50 years at the academy, he had seen reforms, rewrites, even revolts. None of them lasted. But this was different. This was a shift in spirit. He made it official without making it bureaucratic. The recording of the Maelstrom Run incident became required viewing for every incoming class. He always presented it himself. No instructor could carry its weight like he could. The lights would dim. The projection would begin. Chaos on the bridge, voices shouting, systems failing. Then that moment, the woman in gray, walking through the storm of panic as if it were a drizzle. The silence. The code. The green words on the screen. Comms link established. Every time, the room fell completely still. Vance would let the silence hang, then turn to the young faces and say, "That's leadership. It doesn't panic. It doesn't posture. It just solves the problem." Then he would add softly, "Remember her. You won't find her name on your textbooks, but her lesson will find you when you need it most." He never mentioned that she designed the very simulator they trained in, or that she had vanished without trace. The myth was stronger than the facts. Jorik watched those sessions from the back rows, quiet, unassuming, never revealing that he was the one who had failed that test. He didn't need to. The story wasn't about him anymore. It was about everyone. But privately, the memory still burned, not as pain as purpose. He found himself writing small notes after each viewing, observations, fragments of her philosophy. Silence is the last weapon of discipline. Competence is invisible until it's needed. Respect doesn't have a sound, only results. He kept them in a small journal. Over time, other cadets added their own thoughts, their own reflections. That journal became known as the Gray Book. No signatures, no credit, just wisdom passed down, handwritten, dog-eared, alive. It circulated quietly through the academy, its pages growing with each generation. By the end of the term, even the instructors quoted it. The shift in tone wasn't something the fleet command could quantify, but they noticed. Graduation reports began to include new phrases, shows composure under pressure, values interdepartmental cooperation, listens before acting. Traits once seen as soft were now considered strategic. They called them Rostova cadets. 1 year later, the transformation culminated in the grandest ceremony the Academy held, Graduation Day. The vast assembly hall gleamed beneath banners of silver and blue, filled with proud families, brass uniforms, and the electric hum of futures about to begin. Rows of cadets sat in perfect alignment, boots polished, eyes forward, hearts racing. General Vance stood at the podium. The years had etched more lines into his face, but his voice still carried the weight of authority and something deeper: admiration. He read out the honors, the awards, the commendations. The hall erupted with applause after each name, but as the final certificates were handed out, he paused. "There is," he said slowly, "one more honor to bestow." The crowd quieted. This year, the faculty has chosen to award a special commendation, not for tactical excellence, nor for academic distinction, but for something rarer: growth. He let that word hang. This award goes to the cadet who has learned the most difficult lesson of all, that leadership is not about the loudest voice in the room, but the calmest heart under pressure. A murmur spread through the crowd. Jorik stared straight ahead, not daring to breathe. "This year's recipient," Vance continued, "is Cadet Jorik." The silence broke into stunned applause. Jorik froze. He hadn't expected it, didn't think he deserved it. But Vance's gaze met his, steady and knowing. He rose, his steps measured. No swagger, no smirk, just quiet composure. The sound of his boots on the metal stairs echoed louder than any speech. When he reached the stage, Vance handed him a small silver medallion, engraved with a single phrase: "Through failure, clarity." They shook hands. "Say something," Vance murmured softly. Jorik turned to the crowd, hundreds of faces watching, waiting. He didn't prepare a speech. He just spoke from the place where silence had once lived. "I don't deserve this," he began, his voice steady but low, "but I'll try to be worthy of it. I learned that leadership doesn't mean knowing everything. It means learning from everyone." He paused. His eyes drifted instinctively toward the back of the hall, searching. But she wasn't there. She never was. He smiled faintly. "That's all," he said simply and stepped back. The applause rose again, not thunderous but warm, genuine. Later in the quiet after the ceremony, Jorik walked alone through the empty corridors. The banners had been taken down. The air was still. He wandered toward Rostova's bridge. The simulator was dark, the consoles powered down. He sat in the same chair she once had, the communications console, and stared at the blank screens. For a long time he said nothing. Then he whispered, "Thank you." The system, idle but still listening, hummed softly in reply. He reached forward, tapped a single key. The screen flickered to life, revealing that old line of text glowing like an echo from the past. "Comms link established." Jorik smiled. "Still connected," he murmured. And maybe, in a way, they always were. Outside, the night over the academy was clear. A fleet of training ships glittered in orbit, a constellation of future commanders, each carrying a fragment of her teaching. Somewhere among them, perhaps light years away, Admiral Eva Rostova was still moving, silent, unseen, indispensable. She was never one for farewells, but she always left a message, invisible yet unmistakable, in the hearts of those she taught. Competence is its own signal. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it simply resonates through those who learn to listen. The following years turned the lesson into tradition. New cadets still took the maelstrom run, but now, when the simulation plunged them into chaos, they no longer shouted over each other. Someone always paused first, breathed, remembered the story, and in that pause they found clarity. One instructor called it the Rostova pause, a single second of silence before action, a sacred space between impulse and intelligence. That pause saved ships, saved lives. And so the myth became doctrine, the ghost became guidance, the story became a cornerstone. Jorik graduated not as the top cadet, but as the example of redemption. His journey from arrogance to humility became part of the Academy's permanent archive, not as punishment, as promise. Years later, whenever the fleet faced the unknown, a collapsing wormhole, an unexpected ambush, a system glitch, someone would always whisper on the comms, "Establish the link." It wasn't just about communications anymore. It was about composure, trust, connection. That was her legacy. Not medals, not monuments, but mindset. The Ghost Admiral had rewritten not the code of the simulation, but the code of leadership itself. And for those who understood her lesson, the message was eternal. The universe doesn't reward noise, it rewards clarity. What happens when a lesson leaves the classroom and meets the void? Years after that day on Rostova's bridge, Cadet Jorik was no longer a student. He was Captain Jorik, commanding officer of the ECS Vanguard, a deep space exploration ship built for the frontier, a vessel meant to test both engines and souls. He'd earned his rank quietly, without favors or fanfare. His record was clean, his command style steady. The fleet had noticed. The loud cadet had become the quiet captain, the kind whose crew trusted his silence more than another's speeches. But deep space has a way of testing what even the finest academies cannot teach. The Vanguard had been 6 months beyond charted territory when the first anomaly appeared, a gravity storm, invisible to sensors, spinning in the dark like an unseen heartbeat. The crew named it the Spiral Veil. It pulsed with unpredictable energy, warping communications, bending navigation, making even time itself stutter on the bridge displays. At first, Jorik watched it from afar, cautious. Then came the orders: investigate, gather data, report. He obeyed, because that's what the fleet demanded. The Vanguard entered the storm at 300 hours. Within seconds, the world changed. The ship trembled as if gripped by invisible hands. Lights flickered. The forward view dissolved into a swirl of silver and crimson, a storm that wasn't wind or plasma, but distortion itself. "Gravity readings unstable," shouted the helmsman. artificial horizon collapsing. Jorik stood still, watching the storm envelop them, his face calm, his voice even. Reduce thrust, compensate manually, no autopilot corrections. His first officer, a sharp, ambitious young woman named Rena, turned toward him, eyes wide. "Sir, we're losing control of the navigation grid." He nodded once. "Then stop fighting it. We find stability by letting it show us where it breaks." It was something Rostova would have said. The crew moved quickly, disciplined but frightened. Panels blinked in warning, pressure alarms screamed through the decks. The storm was unlike anything they'd encountered, not hostile, but alive. Every calculation contradicted itself. "Communications offline," came another report. Jorik felt a chill ripple through him. That phrase, those same words, had started everything, once upon a time, in a simulator long ago. And in that memory, a single echo rose in his mind. Link established. He turned to the operations station. "Who's at comms?" A young ensign, barely 20, with trembling hands looked up. "I am, sir, Ensign Mara." Her voice quivered. "Systems overloaded. Feedback loop between internal relays and the fleet beacon. If I touch it wrong, we'll lose all contact permanently." Jorik stepped closer, his tone soft, steady. "Report your findings, Ensign. Don't react, just observe." She blinked, caught off guard by the calmness in his voice. I see residual code fragmentation. It's recursive. It's spreading through the auxiliary systems." "Good," he said quietly. "You're seeing it. Now isolate the source, not the symptom." Her eyes widened. "Sir, that'll take too long." "Time will adjust," he said. "Focus." Behind them, the ship groaned under stress. A plasma conduit ruptured somewhere deep in engineering, shaking the deck plates. Sparks rained from an overhead console, but Jorik didn't flinch. He had learned something in those long, silent hours under Rostova's tutelage. Panic multiplies faster than damage. Calm reverses it. He crouched beside Mara's console, scanning the code. The recursive loops, the failing relays, it was all familiar. Like the Maelstrom run, reborn in reality. But this time, he wasn't the arrogant cadet shouting over chaos. He was the quiet captain listening to the storm. "Sir," Rena said, her voice tight, "the reactor's reaching unstable output. We need to abort." He shook his head. "We don't abort understanding, Commander. We find the pattern." "The pattern?" "Everything that looks like chaos hides a rhythm," he said. "Find it and you'll find control." She hesitated, then nodded because somehow his composure steadied her too. The bridge fell into focused silence, the kind that only comes when fear begins to trust discipline. Mara's hands moved faster, steadier. "I see it now," she said, breathless. "There's a subroutine looping through the comms buffer. It's rewriting the response timing. That's what's causing the delay." "Then trap it," Jorik replied softly. "Partition it. Isolate it like it's alive, because it is." She worked in silence, sweat on her brow, fingers dancing over the keys. One by one, the alarms began to fall silent. The storm still raged outside, but the vanguard began to stabilize within. Rena exhaled shakily, hull integrity holding at 82%. Jorik nodded. "Good, maintain it. Don't fight the storm, let it teach you its shape." Outside, lightning curved like ribbons of time. Inside, the crew began to move with purpose again. Calm spread through them like oxygen. And in that moment, standing amidst the hum of the bridge, Jorik felt her presence again. Not a vision, not a ghost, just a feeling, like gravity. "She's here," he thought, "not to save me, but to remind me." The comms console beeped. Mara looked up, astonished. "Sir, we've re-established link." On the screen, a single green line of text appeared, eerily familiar. "Comms link established. Fleet command uplink secure." For a heartbeat, time froze. Rena stared. "Did you?" He shook his head, a quiet smile forming. "No," she did. The crew exchanged glances. half in disbelief, half in awe. But Jorik didn't explain. He just stared at that glowing text, the echo of a moment long past, a message that had somehow found its way through light years of space. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe it was code, or maybe some lessons are written deeper than programming into the soul of the fleet itself. Either way, he understood what to do next. "Helm," he ordered softly, "plot us a slow withdrawal vector. Use the storm's pull, not against it. Let it guide us out." They obeyed. Minutes stretched. The ship creaked and groaned, metal straining under unseen pressure. But the course held. The distortion thinned. The swirling colors outside began to fade back into the blackness of open space. Then silence. The Vanguard cleared the edge of the spiral veil. Systems stabilized. Engines cooled. The stars returned. Cheers erupted across the bridge. Relief, disbelief, triumph. But Jorik didn't celebrate. He just watched the storm receding behind them, a vast, shifting light swallowed by distance. Rena turned to him, smiling. "We made it." He nodded once. "We listened." Later, in his private quarters, he sat at his desk, replaying the comms log. That line of green text still glowed at the end of the feed. He stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "Thank you, Admiral." The ship's lights dimmed automatically for the night cycle. In the low glow, he opened his old journal, the gray book. The pages were worn, filled with years of notes and reflections. He added a new line. "The void listens to those who listen to it." He closed the book gently, the corners frayed from use. For a long while he sat there, the hum of the ship surrounding him, a rhythm steady and alive. And he realized that every lesson, every humiliation, every silent nod from a woman in a gray jumpsuit had led him here, to this moment, this calm, this understanding. Rostova's voice, as he remembered it, whispered like static in his mind. "Command is not about noise, it's about signal." He smiled, signal received. Weeks later, the Vanguard returned to fleet space. The mission report went up the chain of command. Unprecedented gravitational anomaly successfully navigated. Crew stable. Systems restored. But in the final section, Jorik added one personal note. "Our survival depended not on reaction, but reflection. The lesson taught long ago on Rostova's bridge remains the foundation of every calm decision made today. Her legacy persists in every silent moment between chaos and clarity." He didn't know if anyone would read it. He didn't need them to. It wasn't for the record, it was for her. When the report reached Fleet Command, a single response came back, unsigned, unclassified, no encryption, no routing tag. Just one line of text. "Some storms don't test your strength, they test your silence. ER." He stared at it for a long time, heart pounding. She was alive somewhere, watching, listening. He leaned back, the weight of years settling over him, and whispered to the empty room, "Still teaching, Admiral." The console light flickered once faintly, as if in answer. He laughed softly. Outside his viewport, the stars stretched endlessly, their light cold and ancient. But to Jorik, they didn't feel empty anymore. They felt full, threaded with meaning, connection, and the invisible presence of a woman who had taught him what strength truly was. Her lesson wasn't a theory, it was survival. Because in the end, the universe doesn't reward noise. It rewards those who can find calm, even when the void screams. And as the Vanguard sailed quietly through the dark, the comms link light blinked in steady rhythm, green and alive, a heartbeat across the stars. Her heartbeat. How far can one person's silence travel? A ship, a fleet, a generation. Sometimes it starts as a whisper, a story retold in mess halls and training bays, passed between young officers who never met her but feel like they did. They called it the Rostova effect. No one knew who coined the phrase. It just appeared one day in an after-action report from a deep space convoy that had survived a plasma surge. Captain held composure under pressure, applying Rostova Effect Protocol. Fleet Command adopted it quietly, unofficially. But everyone knew what it meant. Don't react. Observe. Listen. Then act once precisely. Across the fleet, things began to change. Briefings grew quieter. Commands grew shorter. Confidence stopped shouting, it began listening. And at the heart of this quiet revolution was Captain Jorik, now a seasoned officer, his once raw confidence tempered by years of silence, service, and storms. The ECS Vanguard had earned a reputation, not for firepower, but for composure. Crews said the ship itself seemed calmer under his command, as if even the metal remembered how to breathe. The fleet noticed. They started assigning him to missions where other captains would falter: first contact, delicate extractions, high-tension rescue operations where every word mattered more than any weapon. He never sought command of others, but his calm pulled people toward him. Other officers began quoting him the way he once quoted Rostova. He didn't like it. He wasn't trying to be a symbol. He just wanted to keep the rhythm she had taught him alive. But the universe, vast and merciless, doesn't let calm stay untested for long. It began with the Larath crisis. A mining colony at the edge of the Perseus Reach, a place so far out that communications took 12 hours to bounce back, reported a chain reaction in their fusion array. The explosion wiped out power across an entire hemisphere. 200,000 colonists trapped underground. No breathable atmosphere above. No functioning beacon. By the time Fleet Command received the first distress signal, they calculated 90 hours before total suffocation. They sent Vanguard. It wasn't the biggest ship, not the fastest, but it was the one that didn't panic. As they dropped from FTL into the system, the planet loomed ahead, shrouded in a thick haze of carbon dust and ionized debris. Lightning rippled across the upper atmosphere. Radiation levels climbing, Rena, now his XO, reported. Her voice was tight but steady. Ground teams estimate limited window for atmospheric entry. Jorik nodded. Deploy probes. I want structural schematics of the colony tunnels. Prioritize life sign clusters. The bridge lights dimmed as data flooded and fractured, glitching, incomplete. The radiation was interfering with everything. Sir, said Mara, now chief comms, her eyes wide over the flickering console. Signal distortion, over 70%. We'll lose voice relay if we enter the lower atmosphere. Then we establish the link manually, Jorik said quietly, even if it means line-of-sight transmissions. Rena turned toward him, her expression grim. That's a one-way operation. Whoever goes down might not come back up. He met her gaze, not defiant, not resigned, just steady. Then it has to be the one who can stay calm under pressure. The crew didn't argue. They knew what he meant. Preparation was silent, efficient. Each officer moved with the quiet precision of ritual. There was no grand speech before descent, only nods, brief glances, hands on shoulders, trust spoken in silence. The shuttle launched. Through the turbulence and the radiation storm, Jorik's voice came calm through the comms. Keep orbit steady. Follow the pattern. Listen before reacting. Rena's hands trembled slightly on the controls. Yes, sir. On the planet's surface, the devastation was total. Metallic sandstorms tore through what was left of the colony spires. The ground glowed with residual fusion discharge. Yet beneath the chaos, faint sensor pings pulsed life signs. Weak, fatting, but alive. Jorik and his small team moved fast, cutting through collapsed tunnels, using portable plasma cutters to breach sealed bulkheads. The deeper they went, the thinner the air became. In the silence of those tunnels, Rostova's lessons returned not as memories but as instincts. Every step deliberate, every command quiet. His voice, even in crisis, was the calmest sound in the dark. Seal behind us, he ordered. We hold pressure as we move. Hours passed. The radiation meter beeped steadily, like a ticking clock. Finally, they reached a collapsed shelter, 40 survivors trapped behind twisted metal and fused support beams. The engineer at his side shook her head. "Sir, any attempt to cut through will bring the roof down." Jorik crouched, studying the structure. The air was thin, the heat oppressive. His mind moved in silence, tracing possibilities. Then he noticed it, a harmonic vibration running through the beam every time the wind outside shifted. "Pressures equalizing through microfractures," he murmured. "We don't cut through, we vent around it." They rerouted power from their suits to a portable stabilizer, gently displacing the air. The metal groaned, then gave way. The hatch fell open. A rush of gasps, coughing, movement. "Fleet rescue," Jorik said softly. "You're safe now." The colonists stared, soot-covered faces illuminated by their helmet lights. Relief and disbelief mixed in their eyes. Mara's voice crackled through the comms. "Captain, we've re-established contact, but signal's weak. One phrase keeps repeating through the interference." Jorik frowned. "Read it." Static, then faint, distorted but clear enough to chill the blood. "Comms link established." For a moment, no one spoke. Rena's voice trembled. "Sir, that's—" "I know," Jorik whispered. "She's listening." Above them, in orbit, the Vanguard fought to hold position against gravitational shear. The storm was eating at their shields, tearing through communications. Yet somehow, the signal persisted, a single thread of green light pulsing between ship and surface, defying the laws of interference. When the last survivor was secured, Jorik took one final look at the wreckage, the twisted structures, the flickering lights, the silence that had swallowed thousands. He whispered under his breath, "We heard you." The shuttle rose through the black clouds, battered but intact. Hours later, as the crew gathered in the briefing room, Jorik stood before them. His uniform was scorched, his voice hoarse, but his presence was steady as always. "No casualties," he said. "No panic, no wasted motion. You all did exactly what the fleet was built to do." He paused, "And what Admiral Rostova taught us to remember." The room went still. Even those who hadn't known the story understood. He looked around at his officers, each one calm, eyes steady, postures balanced. They weren't just his crew, they were proof. "Competence," he said quietly, "is the only language the universe understands. Speak it fluently, and even chaos will listen." There were no cheers, just nods, deep, quiet agreement. After the mission, the fleet recorded the Vanguard's operation as a model of crisis command. The report was filed, analyzed, dissected by strategists across the sectors. They highlighted one phrase from the comms transcript. "Don't fight the storm, listen to it." Fleet doctrine changed. A new section was added to the Command Academy syllabus, Silent Leadership Protocols, modeled on the actions of Jorik's crew during the Lareth crisis. And beneath that title, in small letters, a dedication. Inspired by Admiral Eva Rostova, whose silence still commands the stars. Jorik never asked for the recognition. He didn't attend the fleet ceremony that followed. Instead, he visited an old simulator station back at the academy during shore leave. Rostova's bridge was still there, preserved, quiet. He stood in the center, the air thick with memory. The consoles were dark, but the ghost of her presence lingered as if she had just stepped out for a moment. He placed a hand on the communications console, the same place where she once sat decades ago, and whispered, "We heard you, Admiral, and we still do." Then, without thinking, he powered up the console. The lights flickered, systems whirring to life. The same green text appeared, unchanged after all these years. "Comms link established." He smiled faintly. "Still running," he murmured. From the doorway, a voice broke the silence. "Always will be." Jorik turned. General Thern Vance stood there, older now, slower but still sharp-eyed. He stepped into the glow of the simulator, the years of command etched deep in his face. "She'd be proud," Vance said. "Would she?" Jorik asked quietly. Vance nodded. "You did what she always wanted. You made her lesson louder than she ever could." Jorik glanced at the text on the screen. "Funny, she never raised her voice." "That's why it worked," Vance said. He rested a hand on the rail, his gaze soft. "Noise fades, signal lasts." They stood there in silence, 2 generations bound by one woman's influence, a ghost neither of them could forget. Outside, through the observation glass, ships rose from the docks, sleek, silver, disciplined. Each one commanded by officers who had grown up on stories of the ghost on the bridge. Vance smiled faintly. "She fixed the fleet systems once, but what she really fixed was us." Jorik nodded slowly. "Then maybe that's all command ever is, fixing people, not machines." The old general chuckled. "If more captains believed that, we'd need fewer wars." They shared a quiet laugh. When Vance left, Jorik stayed a moment longer, his reflection mirrored in the console's glass. He whispered, "Sometimes I wonder if she knows what she started." And though no voice answered, the faint hum of the simulator seemed to shift, as if the room itself exhaled. He smiled. "Yeah," he said softly, "I think she knows." Outside, the fleet's engines flared against the stars, a constellation of calm, steady light. Each one a signal. Each one a heartbeat. Each one a whisper that said the same thing. "We are listening." How do you stop a war when silence is the only weapon left? Years had passed, stars had shifted, the fleet had changed. What began as whispers of the Rostova effect had become doctrine. Generations of officers were now raised not to shout commands, but to listen before they spoke. Ships moved with the precision of thought rather than impulse. The fleet had become quieter and stronger. But the universe never stays calm for long. And peace has a cruel way of testing the philosophies that built it. It began on the border of the Taraxis expanse, a volatile frontier where human colonies brushed dangerously close to alien territory. The Turax Collective, a technologically advanced species, brilliant but proud, accused the fleet of violating their neutral zone. What followed wasn't diplomacy. It was escalation. A single misunderstanding, a lost mining drone, an unmapped asteroid belt ignited into threats. Then one tragic night, a Turax patrol vanished near human space. They blamed the fleet. 3 Turax warfleets began mobilizing toward human colonies. Fleet command panicked. Orders flew across subspace. Every available vessel was recalled to defense positions. The word war returned to their transmissions after decades of absence. In the middle of it all stood Admiral Jorik, commander of the Frontier Defense Line, and the last surviving student of Admiral Eva Rostova. He read the reports in silence, his brow furrowed, the quiet hum of the command chamber echoing her lessons in his mind. The admirals above him were divided. Some demanded preemptive strikes, others begged for negotiation. The lines between defense and aggression blurred in the static of fear. When the Fleet Council convened via Hololink, Jorik was the last to speak. A dozen faces flickered around him, generals, strategists, politicians, all voices raised. "Admiral, we can't wait for them to fire first. If we hesitate, they'll see weakness. Move your fleets into position." He waited until the noise peaked, then said quietly, "I hear you." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut air. He leaned forward, eyes steady. "But has anyone actually listened to them?" "What are you suggesting?" one general snapped. "That we don't react," Jorik said. "We observe. We hold the line, but we don't advance. We open every frequency we have, every channel, even passive. We let them see we're not reaching for our weapons." The chairman frowned. "And if they fire?" Jorik's voice was calm. "Then we return fire, but not before. Command isn't about being first, it's about being right." The council fell silent. He could feel their doubt, that familiar bureaucratic fear of hesitation. But behind it he sensed something else: memory. Many of them had been cadets once when Rostova's bridge was required viewing. They remembered her, even if only through legend. Finally the chairman nodded slowly. "Admiral Jorik, you have temporary command authority over the frontier response. Hold the line, but if they cross it, end this quickly." "I understand," Jorik said. But as the connection faded, he whispered under his breath, "Quick endings aren't always victories." The fleet assembled at the edge of known space. Dozens of warships, sleek, silent, gleaming, held formation in a long arc around the Taraxis border. Their engines pulsed softly, weapons cold, shields humming at low power. It was a line of restraint, not aggression. In the center stood the Vanguard, older now, but still alive, still Jorik's flagship. Its bridge was quiet, bathed in the blue glow of the border stars. Officers moved with deliberate calm. "3 Turax warfleets incoming," Rena reported, now an admiral herself serving as his second. "They've spread in a crescent formation. Their weapons are charged." Jorik nodded. "Any communication?" Mara, still at comms after all these years, shook her head. "They're broadcasting encrypted bursts, but nothing directed at us." "Keep our channels open," he said. "Passive, transparent, let them see the silence." Hours passed. The Turax ships grew larger on the screens, elegant, crystalline vessels, their hulls pulsing with alien energy. A wrong move, a single nervous order, and the void would ignite into war. Jorik stood at the center of the bridge, his posture balanced, his breathing even. Around him, fear simmered, controlled but present. He could feel it. He remembered it. He whispered, almost to himself, "Every storm has a rhythm." Rena glanced at him. "Sir." He didn't answer, he just kept watching. The Turax ships halted precisely at the border marker. A line of energy flickered between the fleets, an invisible frontier. Mara's console beeped softly. "Sir, they're transmitting something." "Put it through." A cascade of harmonic tones filled the bridge like music, a pattern repeating, shifting, searching for resonance. Jorik frowned. "Not language, signal." He moved to the console, his fingers flying across the interface. The pattern wasn't random. It was structured, a call and response, not of words but of frequencies. "They're testing if we can listen," he realized. Rena's voice was hushed. "Can we?" He smiled faintly. "We can try." He input a response, a mirror of their pattern, slightly delayed, carefully matched in frequency. The bridge lights dimmed as the transmission echoed back into the void. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then one by one, the Turax ships dimmed their weapons arrays. Gasps filled the bridge. Rena turned to him, astonished. "They heard us." "No," Jorik said softly. "We heard each other." He straightened. "Record the pattern, translate what you can. Let's talk." Over the next 6 hours, through nothing but harmonic code, the Vanguard communicated with the Turax flagship. No translators, no weapons, just rhythm. A language born of patience. When the transmission finally ended, Mara looked up from her console, eyes wet. "They never wanted war. They thought we were building weapons along the border." "We weren't," Jorik said quietly. "They know that now." Rena exhaled. "You stopped it." He shook his head. "No, she did." He looked out at the stars, at the calm that had replaced the chaos. "She taught us how to listen when everyone else was ready to shout." The Turax incident became legend across the fleet. Analysts called it the Silent Accord. Historians wrote about it as the moment humanity learned that communication could be music instead of noise. And at the center of every account, one name repeated: Admiral Jorik. But in his official report, under command methodology, he wrote only one line. Applied Rostova effect. Silence, observation, signal alignment. That was all, no heroism, no glory, just respect. When the fleet command honored him with the Stellar Cross for diplomatic bravery, he didn't attend the ceremony. He was already back aboard the Vanguard, preparing for another mission. He wasn't avoiding praise. He simply knew that silence carried it better. Late one night, he found himself standing alone on the observation deck. Beyond the viewport, the Taraxis border shimmered faintly, peaceful now. He spoke softly, not to anyone visible. "You were right again, Admiral. Command isn't about force, it's about frequency." The stars didn't answer, but one by one, the beacons along the border flickered in perfect sync, as if acknowledging him. He smiled. Weeks later, a classified message arrived on his personal channel. No sender, no encryption tag, just a timestamp older than the fleet itself. He opened it. The hologram flickered, static, then a woman's voice. Calm, precise, familiar. "If you're seeing this, it means the lesson survived. You understood. That's all that ever mattered." He froze. "The universe doesn't need louder men," she continued. "It needs quieter ones, ones who listen long enough to hear the truth beneath the noise. You did well, Jorik, I'm proud." Then her image flickered into being faint, ghost-like. Admiral Eva Rostova, older, weathered, but unmistakably alive. "If you ever wonder what to do next," she said softly, "just establish the link." The hologram ended. The console dimmed, leaving him alone with the hum of the ship, the sound of systems alive and steady. Jorik stood there for a long time, his throat tight. Then he whispered, "Signal received." Outside, the border stars glowed steady in formation. Thousands of tiny lights, blinking like her code, repeating the same eternal rhythm. Comms link established. What happens when the lesson outlives the teacher? Years turned into decades. The storms came and went, the wars threatened and faded. New fleets rose. New admirals took command. And somewhere deep in the collective heart of the stars, her lesson endured. Not through monuments or archives, through people, through choices, through the pause between reaction and reason. Through silence. Admiral Jorik grew old beneath those stars. His once black uniform had faded, the silver trim worn smooth from years of service. The medals, untouched in drawers, meant less to him now than the simple hum of an engine that listened. The Vanguard had become a legend, a ship that outlasted its own generation. Its hull had been reforged, its systems upgraded, but the soul remained the same. There was something about her, something that made every crewman a little quieter, a little steadier, as if the ship herself carried memory. And maybe she did. Jorik stood alone on her bridge one last time. The lights were dim, the air still, the hum familiar. Outside the viewport, 1,000 stars burned, each one distant, patient, eternal. Rena entered quietly behind him. Her hair had gone gray, her voice softer, but her composure unchanged. "They're waiting for you," she said gently. He nodded, still gazing at the stars. "It never feels like enough time, does it?" "Time's generous," she said. "It's just not sentimental." He smiled faintly at that, spoken like a true officer. She stepped beside him, looking out at the field of light. "You taught us well." He shook his head. "I only remembered what she did." Rena smiled. "Then you both taught us." They stood there in silence for a long moment, two lives that had carried a lesson across half a century. Finally, Jorik straightened his uniform. "Let's not keep them waiting." They left the bridge together. The fleet's grand assembly hall had never been so quiet. Thousands of officers, cadets, and dignitaries filled the tiers, uniforms from every corner of the galaxy. No speeches echoed. No music played. They were waiting. At the center of the stage stood a simple chair, a single console beside it. A symbol, the Bridge of Rostova rebuilt, exact in every detail. Jorik stepped up slowly, the years visible in his movements but not in his eyes. He paused before the console, fingers brushing the cold surface. He could still see her there, the woman in gray, patient and unflinching. He could still hear her voice when the simulation fell apart around them all those years ago. Establish the link. He looked up at the sea of faces before him. I was young when I met her, he began softly. Arrogant, loud. I thought command was about control, about being the one who spoke the most. A faint ripple of laughter, respectful, knowing. I was wrong. He paused, the silence wrapping around the room like a living thing. She showed us that real command isn't volume. It's understanding. It's knowing when to speak and when to listen, when to move and when to wait. He looked around at the rows of cadets, the new generation who'd grown up on stories of Rostova's bridge, but never knew the weight of it. You'll face storms, he said. Every one of you. Some will look like battles, some will look like failure, and some will sound like silence. Don't fear the silence, that's where the answers hide. He let the words rest. No music, no applause, just listening. Then he reached toward the console. The old, flickering interface glowed green. The familiar line appeared, pulsing gently. Comms link established. The crowd inhaled softly, a sound like reverence. Jorik smiled faintly. That's how it all began, a girl we didn't respect, a mistake we never forgot, a silence that taught us everything. He straightened. We call it the Rostova effect, but it's more than that. It's a way of seeing the universe, of trusting that composure is stronger than chaos, that understanding is faster than fear. He looked out over the audience, and that dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. For a moment the hall was utterly still. Then, slowly, thousands of officers rose to their feet in silence, not clapping, not cheering, just standing, a salute made of stillness. He bowed his head slightly, humbled. And in that quiet, something changed in the air, a shimmer, faint but real, flickering at the edges of the console's light. A static whisper, low and rhythmic, like an echo breaking through long-distance comms. Rena's eyes widened. Sir, the console's live. Jorik turned back, startled. The text shifted. New words appeared beneath the old. Link maintained, proud of you, ER. He froze, the air seemed to thicken. Rena stepped closer, whispering, is it real? He smiled softly, eyes glistening. Doesn't have to be. He placed his hand on the console, the way she once had. And for a moment, the hall seemed to hum in sync, ships in orbit, satellites, comm relays, all resonating faintly on the same frequency. Across light years, the signal pulsed once more, as if the entire fleet had heard her voice again. Comms link established. The word stayed there, glowing steady, timeless. Jorik exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. He turned back to the audience. That's the legacy, he said. Not the ships, not the ranks, the connection. He paused. Hold it, protect it, live it. Then quietly he stepped back, saluted the console, and walked off the stage. The audience remained silent, heads bowed. It wasn't mourning, it was respect. That night, long after the ceremony ended, Jorik returned to his quarters aboard the Vanguard. The halls were empty, the ship dim. He moved slowly, his hand trailing along the bulkhead as if feeling the heartbeat of the vessel one last time. He entered his ready room, sat down, and opened his old, worn journal, the gray book. Its pages were filled with notes, quotes, fragments of lessons passed between cadets and captains for 50 years. He turned to the final blank page and wrote, in slow, careful strokes. She taught us that silence isn't absence, it's awareness. He closed the book gently. The ship's AI, long since upgraded, flickered softly to life. Admiral, it said in a voice calm and neutral, do you wish to transmit your final log entry? He smiled faintly, not yet. He rose, moving to the viewport. The stars stretched infinitely before him, the same stars he'd looked upon as a cadet, a soldier, a captain, and now, as a man who had finally understood what leadership truly meant. He spoke softly, to the stars, to her, to himself. "We kept the signal alive, Admiral, and maybe that's all any of us can do." The ship hummed quietly in response, the low, comforting pulse of engines running smooth. Outside, one of the nearby relay beacons flashed. Then another. Then another. Across the void, a wave of green light rippled from ship to ship, planet to planet, the entire fleet sinking for a single, silent second. A galaxy exhaling in unison. A whisper turned into eternity. They found his body the next morning, seated at his desk, peaceful, eyes closed, a faint smile on his lips. The console beside him still glowed faintly. The last log transmitted automatically, a single line sent across every fleet channel, civilian and military alike. Link established, stand down, all clear. It wasn't a command, it was a farewell. They held no grand parade, no state funeral. By his own request, there were no speeches. Instead, across every ship in the fleet, every officer stood for 1 minute in silence. No words. No music. Just calm. And in that silence, somewhere beyond reach, her voice seemed to echo again, faint, ageless, proud. "Well done, Jorik." The stars pulsed once more, as if answering. Years later, new cadets still walked the halls of the Aegis Command College. They still touched the console on Rostova's bridge. They still read the opening line of the Gray Book. Command is not about noise, it's about signal. And when they run their first simulation, when everything starts to fall apart, when panic rises and orders blur, one of them always remembers. They stop, they breathe. And in that pause they find her. Not as a ghost, not as history, but as a frequency that still hums beneath everything the fleet has become. Because some legacies don't need names. They just need to be heard. And across the quiet expanse of space, a single pulse of green light flickers once more. Comms link established. Then silence. The kind that speaks louder than any sound. The kind that commands. The kind that endures.